The NBA draft withdrawal deadline has come and gone, and the reigning national champs are the happy recipients of some good news.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Friday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. I'm Isaac Schade. That's my guy, Andy Patton. And you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We want to thank you for making us your first listener watch to get your Friday going the right way. Let's be honest, it's already the weekend. We want to remind you can catch every single episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all you everydayers who are here, and of course, all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord as well. Andy, coming up on the show today, we are just a day plus removed from the NBA draft withdrawal deadline, where college players had to make decisions to either stay in the draft or come back to college. For those who are like, wait, June 15th? No, you're wrong. Okay, I don't know how many times we've said that. So, Andy, it makes sense then that we're going to talk today about draft deadline winners, draft deadline losers, and we're going to go both sides of that. And also, the ACC revealed their conference opponents on Wednesday, not necessarily the schedule. And man, the reality is sinking in of this weird new format that the ACC is leaning into. We'll unpack that and the reality of it coming up. But Andy, where we want to start is the winners from the draft deadline. The SEC was the biggest thing in college basketball last year, and doesn't look like anything's changing. Who's your big winner from the draft deadline?
Yeah, it's a lot of SEC teams on our list here that we're going to be talking about. I'm talking about an SEC team that's not necessarily one of the more powerhouse programs and not one that maybe has been getting as much attention for what specifically happened in the draft deadline. But I want to talk about Texas A&M. I want to talk about the Aggies and Buckyball a little bit here because they got two really great pieces of news, and one of them was kind of a roundabout way of being involved with the NBA draft deadline. But first of all, they get McKenzie Mgbako back. He, of course, the Indiana transfer, he committed to Texas A&M a while ago, but was in the draft process, was one of the few players who got invited from the G League Elite Camp to the NBA Draft Combine. Very regularly, guys who are on that list end up staying in the draft process. In fact, we'll talk about another one of those players in the losers segment later on in the show. But Mgbako does decide to return to school despite being a guy who I think probably could have gone in the second round, especially with how many players returned to school. I think he would have been a second round pick, but instead he heads to Texas A&M. I think he's going to be a phenomenal fit in Bucky's system. He's a bigger jumbo-sized wing. He could play some small ball four, could play the three. I think he was never quite properly utilized at Indiana. I know we've had that conversation on the show before, but I think there's an opportunity for him to really look great and playing in the SEC, playing against the high-level competition. I think it's good for Mgbako, but it's also just phenomenal for Texas A&M, who also got a transfer commitment from Pop Isaacs.
Ooh.
And the reason we talk about Pop Isaacs,
how did that happen? What does that have to do with the draft deadline?
Right, Pop Isaacs wasn't in the draft process, but Milos Uzan was. And Pop Isaacs, early in the transfer portal process, committed to Houston after spending 8 games last year at Creighton before going down with the injury. And it was a great heist for Houston, in particular with the assumption that Milos Uzan was going to stay in the draft process. They had Isaacs. They have the two phenomenal freshman point guards in Kingston Flemings and Isaiah Harwell. And then Milos Uzan comes back and decides, hey, I'm going to come back to school. I'm going to play for Houston. We're going to run it back, try to win a national championship. And at that point, that backcourt was a little bit crowded, and I was going to say right after, and it was in fact beforehand. At least it was publicly announced beforehand that Pop Isaacs was actually flipping his commitment from Houston to Texas A&M, and then about an hour later, it was confirmed that Uzan was returning to school. So I think it was pretty clear those two things were related to each other. But what a phenomenal second get for Texas A&M and Bucky McMillan to get both Mgbako and Pop Isaacs out of the transfer portal and kind of committing around the same time just due to the draft withdrawal deadline. Isaacs, phenomenal player, averaged 4 assists, 16 points in those 8 games at Creighton, put up similar numbers prior to that as well at Texas Tech. Just an excellent player and kind of completes what has looked like a really complete rebuild for Texas A&M. Of course, most teams that lose coaches, that's what happens. But you get Mgbako and Isaacs. You also get Federico from Texas Tech, Rylan Griffin from Kansas, Rashawn Agee from USC. Zach Clements from Kansas, Marcus Hill from NC State. Like, there's a ton of really good players joining this Aggies team. And I'm really interested to see what Bucky can do and how his system will translate to the SEC. But I can tell you what, it's going to translate a heck of a lot better now that they have both Pop Isaacs and McKenzie Mgbako in the mix.
That's very well said. Andy, Bucky McMillan loves his double-named players. Had a chore at Samford a few years ago. I really hope Ryland Griffin can get back to what he did at Alabama, more so than the version we saw at Kansas this past year. I mean, it could be a great first year in College Station. As you said, the Pop Isaacs and Mgbako storyline of it all is interesting. I read from Kelvin Sampson, I feel like, Andy, that Isaac's commitment initially to Houston wasn't like, you know, when you like buy a house and there's like contingencies. Yeah. I feel like I heard Coach Sampson say it wasn't contingent on Uzan's decision. He was going to stay no matter what. But then the timing of it doesn't, like, as you said, it feels like these things were mutually exclusive. Yeah. So I don't really know what to make of that. But regardless, Pop is in College Station and Milos is in Houston, actually not too far from each other. So Pop can pack up his bags and drive down the road a little bit. Andy, for my big winner, I'm going to stay in the SEC and roll with the national champion Florida Gators. Previously, Boogie Fland had pulled out of the NBA draft and had already left Arkansas to commit to Florida. One of my who did I recently hear talking about this? I wish I could remember. Had said they had talked to Coach Cal and that he's kind of the mind of like, hey, that's great if you want to go into the NBA draft or into the portal, but you're not coming back. Yeah. And so that's an interesting just part of this era that we're in here, where some coaches are going to do that and some coaches would welcome guys back with open arms. Regardless, Boogie lands in Gainesville and Todd Golden is very thank you for that. Then the big news is that Alex Condon decides to pull out of the NBA draft, and that means that, and Leaf and I talked about this on Wednesday of this week, Andy, that crazily somehow Florida maintains their front court completely intact from their national championship, kind of similar to with 07 when the whole starting five decided to return to try to defend that championship. So not only do you get Alex Condon pulling out and coming back, but you also have Tommy Houck and Ruben Chinyelu and Micah Hanlockton. All of that front court, we'll see if that can continue to work the same way it did last year. Leaf is of the mind that basically Houck, Condon, and Chinyelu are your starters at 3 through 5 in some order, with then Boogie Fland and Xavion Lee, the other transfer, in the backcourt. So we'll see if that mixture works. But Andy, all told, with Condon and Fland back, Florida's a big winner.
Yeah, we talked about this off air before we hit the record button, but if that truly ends up being their starting lineup, they won't have anybody between like 6'3" and 6'10", I think, in their starting lineup, like, which is just really bonkers to think about. I don't know if that's what they'll end up doing or not, but certainly I think you'd make the argument that it's their 5 most talented players on the roster. Yes, so if they're not the starting lineup, they're probably the guys who play the most, but it'll be interesting to see how Coach Golden makes that work. But Isaac, we got some other SEC teams we want to talk about in our honorable mentions. 2 teams in the state of Alabama, of course, Alabama and Auburn. We got to start with Alabama because, as you guys can hear, your boy here, his voice is going, and he recorded a show late on Wednesday night after the draft deadline was done and thought, okay, there's nothing else that's going to happen. So we're going to talk about all these great SEC guards, Otega Oweh, Tahad Pettiford. And then we finished the record button, published that show, and then LeBaron Philon said, excuse me, I think I'm actually going to return to school as well. So we missed that on Thursday's show, but we're going to talk about it here on Friday. What an incredible get for Nate Oates and the Crimson Tide to get Philon back in the mix. Tremendous player last year, has had a first-round buzz on him for most of this NBA draft process. Obviously, he's a bit of an undersized guard. There were some concerns about his game a little bit, but was not expecting this. He seemed incredibly locked in on going to the draft. So for Bama to get him back is tremendous news. And then, of course, for Auburn, to get Tahad Pettiford back, who was one of the most kind of jitterbug scoring type guards in the country last year, as a true freshman, to get him back for his sophomore year for an Auburn team that lost pretty much the entire rest of that backcourt to graduation for the most part, with Kelly gone and Denver Jones gone, and obviously in the front court, Janai Broom gone. Like, to have Pettiford come back is just massive news for Auburn. They also got a commitment from a Serbian big man in Filip Jovic the same day as Pettiford coming back. So that's a good day for Bruce Pearl and the Auburn Tigers. And of course, a good late night for Nate Oates and the Crimson Tide as well.
Andy, I had visions on Thursday of people listening to the show on Thursday and just yelling curses at your name.
Yeah,
for
they
talking
probably
about
did.
all these SEC guys coming back and no LeBaron Philon. And I hope people like threw their phones and smashed and weeping and gnashing of teeth. No,
I hope they're enraged.
Yes. And that is hilarious and great. Andy, one other honorable mention is Yaxel Lendeborg deciding to pull out of the draft and complete his transfer from UAB to Michigan. With a lot of these, with talking about Florida and Texas A&M, we had multiple players, but with Lendeborg, I think that just so drastically changes who Michigan is going to be this year because of everything he does and will bring to the front court. And so that he alone making this decision, which was one of the few shocks to me, right? Along with Philon, I really thought Lendeborg was going to stay in. Andy, where, just in a word, where were you on that? Did you think he was?
Yeah, he was the most surprising to me. Like I thought Coward and Lendeborg were going to stay in, and Coward obviously did. But Lendeborg, I was surprised to see him come back. Obviously, the appeal of getting to play for a team in the Big Ten and kind of prove that your skill set translates to a higher level is makes a ton of sense, but he was already getting a first round grade. Like it's risky to come back to school where the odds of improving your draft stock are probably not as good as the odds are that you might depreciate your draft stock. So a bit of a risk for Lendeborg, but he's going to get a whole heck of a lot of money to go play for Dusty May. So I'm sure it'll be a good year for the Wolverines. We'll see what happens with Yaxel's stock after that.
Yeah, man, the Big Ten is going to be really interesting this season. Now, Andy, we have just heaped praise upon the SEC. That's the SEC. I just decided to make it a word. But not every team out of the SEC was a winner from the withdrawal deadline, with Coach Cal and the Hogs taking a tough loss. More on that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, y'all, the NBA playoffs are in full swing. As we record this, we don't know what happened last night, but maybe as you listen to or watch this today, the NBA finals are set. And every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. So whether it's a game-winning shot, a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it so easy to stay in the game. You can do it before tip-off, or you can do it live. Maybe you had an appointment before a game, and you get in, you're like, man, I didn't get that bet in. No worries, you can do it in real time. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. How about some national champion odds for next year's college basketball season? Right now, Purdue, Houston, and Duke lead the way at plus 1,100. UConn has the next best odds at plus 1,600. And then this whole quintet of Florida, Louisville, Michigan, Kansas, and St. John's at plus 1,700. If you think any of those are great, get in on it. If you think there's somebody else not in that group that has better value, congrats to you. Do that as well. Are you new to FanDuel? Well, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. So go ahead. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Andy, we turn our attention from draft deadline winners to the draft deadline losers. It makes me want to ask you, what is your favorite song about losers? Is it Loser by Three Doors Down off the same album that had Kryptonite in it? Is it Beck? I'm a Loser,
Beck,
baby.
I thought you were going to start with Beck when you said Loser and then went with Three Doors Down. I was like, oh, that is not the song.
Right. I don't know why that one came to me first. I feel like there's another song with Loser in it.
There's probably more than one other song that has Loser.
No. Only three songs ever have ever. All right, Andy, about the business at hand. Who is your big loser from the draft deadline?
Yeah, I think overall, I think one of the main sentiments, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but college basketball was really collectively a winner. I think is a pretty obvious,
good word,
very true sentiment. I mean, so many players returned, and I know that, like, if you want to talk about real losers, it's teams that only have a pick in the second round of the NBA draft. Like the amount of talent that they no longer are able to go after, no longer being able to get a guard like Pettiford or Owe or somebody like Condon, or I mean, the list goes on and on. So I think college basketball collectively had mostly winners, but one team that stands out to me is a team that seemed the most unprepared to lose their star player to the NBA draft is Penn State. And I know that Penn State's not a team that we're expecting necessarily big things from this year, but I think Coach Mike Rhodes has the ability to build something there. And they had this tremendous player last year in Yannick Koenen-Niederhauser, who was, he was outstanding. He was led the Big Ten in shot blocking last year, averaged 13.6 boards, was really, really efficient scorer. He was their second leading scorer last year. And again, like Mgbako, I mentioned this with him, he was invited to the G League Elite Camp and at the time was not really considered a super serious draft prospect. Like, oh, maybe he'll stay in the draft or maybe he'll get some feedback and come back to Penn State type of thing. But he tested extremely well at the combine. He did really well in the scrimmages. And at that point, it started to feel like, okay, there's some real momentum for Niederhauser to stay in the draft process. And that is, in fact, what ended up happening. He's staying in the draft. And Penn State does not seem like they have prepared for life without Niederhauser. They've only made one transfer portal addition, and it was a shooting guard in Josh Reed from Cincinnati. They do have a trio of freshmen coming in, but none of them are power forwards. They do have a big in Justin Hauser, a 6'11" center, but he's the 226th ranked prospect in the 2025 recruiting class. I don't think he's a player that, if he's who's going to replace Niederhauser, that's very problematic for Penn State. They do have Caden Mingo is a really great prospect, one of the best freshmen that Penn State has landed, but he's a 6'2" point guard. He's not replacing Niederhauser, and neither is 6'7" small forward Mason Blackwood. So this just feels like a team that was kind of caught in a situation where they started the offseason and kind of went through their offseason process, in my opinion, at least reading between the lines, with the expectation that Niederhauser was going to be back. And with that not happening, we know what the transfer portal looks like at this point. We know the amount of talent that is still out there, especially in the front court positions. It's pretty barren. And Penn State, the odds of them finding a player as good as Yannick Koenen-Niederhauser are slim to none. And so to me, again, they're not a team that had super high expectations this year. It's not a catastrophic, like, oh, this team was going to be top 25 and now they're not even going to finish top half. Like, it's not that dramatic, but a team that definitely would have been a lot better with Niederhauser in the mix, now doesn't have him and doesn't seem to have an opportunity to really replace him on the roster.
Yeah, man, that's tough. The transfer, at least the domestic transfer portal barrel is pretty barren. We're down to the dregs, I guess you'd call it at this point. So tough for Penn State to find anything there. We mentioned that not all SEC schools were winners, and that's because I'm going to talk about Arkansas for my school. Yes, Andy, certainly some winning with Carter Knox deciding to pull out and come back. That's great news for the Hogs. But the Hogs, we talked about Boogie Fland going to Florida. And Andy, I don't know if you know how this works, but that means consequently he won't be playing for Arkansas this year. Isn't that crazy?
That is what it means.
That's a shock to me that he can't double dip and play for two different schools this year. But then obviously, I think it kind of feels like there was some last minute hope that Adu Thiero might pull out and come back to school, which would have been, good grief, massive for Arkansas. I'm even remembering back to last year where it felt like Thiero was going to go anywhere but Arkansas, and then ultimately decided to follow Coach Cal from Kentucky to Fayetteville. And, I wondered, like, would they be able to pull that miracle out their butts again? And the answer is no. Thiero decides to stay in the draft. Cool, good for you. But that means now that Arkansas has to go find ways to replace that. Obviously, with Carter Knox coming back, with DJ Wagner still there, you're happy about that. But it's hard to replace someone of Thiero's athleticism and capability and everything he brings to the table. And so for me, Andy, Arkansas then is kind of my big loser of the deadline.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Knox coming back, Billy Richmond coming back helps. They have some great freshmen coming in, but they're mostly kind of guards. They're not really replacing Thiero positionally. I think Isaiah Seeley's kind of similar position, but he's their least highly regarded freshman. So I think that Arkansas is probably going to be fine. And I think they were not shocked by Thiero the way that maybe Penn State was shocked. But yeah, it's still between him and Fland. Like, those are two really talented players that Coach Cal doesn't have going into next year. Looking at the honorable mentions, I kind of picked a weird one here, and I literally put in our notes, hear me out. So hear me out.
No, I won't. La, 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 la. I'm not
going to hear me out. I got to talk louder, which is hard for me to do right now. Kansas is my honorable mention for a biggest loser, and here's why. they not only missed out on Darion Williams, who withdrew from the NBA draft, but then committed to NC State. But it was clear that Kansas was kind of in pursuit of a high-profile three wing-type player, missing out on Darion Williams. And then the two biggest small forwards who are still in the transfer portal, really the three biggest small forwards who are still in the transfer portal as of Wednesday morning, in a matter of hours, were all gone. And one of them was Tyon Grant-Foster, who I don't think Kansas was pursuing, but he commits to Gonzaga. The other two were RJ Lewis and Jameer Watkins, who both decided to stay in the draft process. And I don't think that either St. John's or Florida State are really the losers here, because both of those programs had already kind of moved on from those players respectively. But Kansas would have loved either of them. They would have loved either of those guys on their roster next year. I think that's true of Villanova. I think that's true of Georgetown. I think to an extent it's true of North Carolina, who I know was at least connected to Watkins to some extent. So teams that really were looking for a high-profile wing-type player in the transfer portal got some bad news with both Watkins and Lewis staying in the draft. I don't really blame either of them. I'm a little bit more perplexed by Lewis. He's not really showing up on a lot of mock drafts, but Watkins did himself a lot of favors with the strong performance in the combine, so I'm not surprised he's staying in. But certainly any team that was hoping to maybe get one of those guys in the portal, which is why I start with Kansas, because I think they were the most likely to land one of them, they got to start looking elsewhere. And the options, like we said, they're running pretty thin.
And it's so interesting, Andy, that we have two blue bloods, as you said, Kansas and North Carolina, both really in search of a three. I mean, we could have put North Carolina on the losers list for not being able to keep Drake Powell and not getting anyone really yet to replace him. So we'll see what happens there. And then I think we could also add Duke onto this losers honorable mention list, insofar as, yes, you didn't expect any of Cooper Flagg or Con Knipple or Kaman Malawach to come back, but to lose three lottery picks of that caliber, like you just, even with a new great crop coming in, that's a trio, Andy, that just was something different in college basketball last year. And then obviously you thought you had gotten Cedric Coward to come in and replace some of that transferring over from Washington State. I never in a million years at the beginning of the draft process would have thought we would have had to have a conversation about him never suiting up for Duke. But here we are, because he does all this great stuff at the combine and puts himself in great position. And so Duke consequently goes out and gets Dame Sarr, which, you know, you and I talked about this last week. We don't know that necessarily he brings everything to the table at the same level that Coward would do. It's a great ad, but is it a Coward level ad? We don't yet know that. And so all of that puts Duke at least in a little bit of the non-winner category here, Andy.
Well, as you talk about North Carolina and Duke to close out the segment, it's a perfect segue to talk about the ACC scheduling, because they released their opponent matchups for the 25-26 season on Wednesday. And the reality of this just unique, odd format for the ACC and for a lot of these bigger bloated conferences is really kind of setting in. And we're going to talk about that to close out the show coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, closing out the show, moving away from our conversation about the draft deadline winners and losers to instead talk about the news that came out on Wednesday. The ACC's opponents for their conference schedule were released. Again, the schedule has not come out, so we do not know the dates or the times for these games, but we do know the matchups that will be played in the Atlantic Coast Conference for the 25-26 season. And we know that there's going to be some changes, some things that we're not really used to, and some maybe some frustration for fan bases who are used to seeing some of these matchups that we're not going to get this upcoming season because of the additions of teams like Stanford and Cal and SMU and kind of what it has done to the conference. So as a reminder, there's 18 total games in the ACC conference. That means each team will play 7 teams at home only. They will play 7 teams on the road only. And then they will have one permanent rival, which they play twice. And then one rotating home and home with one team that will alternate every year that they will play twice. And then there'll be one team that each team doesn't play. And so that's kind of how it works, how it's set up. And it's created a weird situation where we're not getting some matchups, Isaac, that we're really used to seeing out of a conference that has a tremendous history in college basketball. And it's a little disappointing to see some of these matchups not come into fruition for this upcoming season.
It really is, Andy. And it continues to be the way I look at it and talk about it is, you all have made these bloated conference beds and now you have to lie in them and you see the results of it. And even with the ACC, even though it's big, you still could have played everybody. Even with cutting back to 18 games. If you just had one home and home and then played all the other teams, you could have done it and played all that. But Andy, it just completely continues to cheapen the regular season championships are going to mean less and less and less. And I hate that because I traditionally value regular season championships over conference tournament championships because of the longevity and diversity of ability to play different styles and things that a regular season championship shows. For example, I will still value the Big East regular season championship at a high level because they're still playing a true round robin.
Right.
Love that. Thank you, Big East. Now in the ACC, there's a team that you don't even see. Andy, let me just rattle off the matchups that won't happen this year. North Carolina, Boston College, Duke, Miami, NC State, Cal, Clemson, Virginia, Florida State, Louisville, Georgia Tech, SMU, Notre Dame, Wake Forest, Pitt, Virginia Tech, and Syracuse, Stanford. So each of those matchups we will not see in the regular season. So Andy, like a couple big ones that jump out to me are, number one, Jay Lucas leaves Duke's staff as an assistant coach, goes to Miami. Would be cinema to see those two teams play in the regular season, especially when you think about the Boozer twins of it all, where he was hoping to be able to get them to follow him to Miami, does end up, getting at least one player to go with him. And now they won't even play each other, Andy. That is a massive miss. I don't care what you have to do to change that around. The fact that we're not going to get that matchup is absurd to me. And I think secondly, then staying in that triangle area of North Carolina, because Duke and North Carolina are going to be rivals for the first time since 1919, Andy, over a century. We will not see NC State and North Carolina play in Chapel Hill. They will play, but it's only in Raleigh. And so that kind of, remember this time last year as we were mourning the loss of the Pac-12 and it's over 100 years of history. This is not that magnitude, but it's in that same vein of things we're losing in pursuit of the almighty dollar. I'm going to use a phrase that I said multiple times last week when we had the conversation about Ali Khalifa getting his waiver denied by the NCAA, and it's thematic to still be in the ACC, but it feels like we've lost the plot. Like it feels like we're not focusing on the right things here. I understand that the ACC is trying to figure out a way to make this quote unquote as fair as possible, which I don't even think they're really doing successfully. But like, I understand that this is a difficult endeavor to make this schedule work, but like if the result that you're coming up with is to effectively cancel a 100-year tradition and not have a key game between two interstate rivals played on a beautiful, like one of the most regarded campuses in college basketball, we've lost the plot. If you're denying fans an opportunity to see the Boozer twins play Coach Jay Lucas at Miami, to see Shelton Henderson, who flipped his commitment to see Jay Lucas play his old team, we've lost the point. Like we're not focusing on the right things. Like I understand the difficulty of making this schedule work, but we're missing something here. Like this is not how it's supposed to be. We're losing the point of what college basketball is. Rivalries, fan bases, that passion, that hatred between them, not having that and denying the opportunity for that to grow, because it could grow between Duke and Miami. Are they ever going to be rivals on the same page as North Carolina? No, of course not. But you're missing an opportunity for something to develop here. And outside of that, I know it's kind of the next point, like certain teams are getting, they're going to be screwed over by the fact that their net ranking is going to suffer by not getting to play certain teams. Miami is a team that they're completely rebuilt under Coach Lucas. They have a talented roster. I think they could contend for an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. You know what would really help them? 2 chances to play Duke, but they're not getting that opportunity to do that. They don't even getting one. They don't even need to beat them. Just play them twice, and it's going to help your net ranking unless you get absolutely blown out, which I don't think would have happened because Lucas is going to be pretty familiar with how to game plan against Duke. The fact that we're not getting that game is a travesty on so many levels, and it's dramatically impacting Miami and their opportunity to put together a resume worthy of making. Like if they get left out because of their net ranking when they didn't get to play what is very likely going to be the best team in the ACC next year, I mean that's a travesty. It truly is. And I just, for that combined with the not having the NC State game, and there's many other things on here too that stand out, but those are just ones that really stand out of like, this is, we're not focusing on what makes college basketball great. We're focusing on the wrong things. And as long as we continue to do that,
there's fear that people are going to continue to lose interest if they don't get to see the kind of matchups that they're used to seeing and that they want to see from this sport.
And some of the irony of that, Andy, like thinking about the NC State, North Carolina thing, is that NC State was the deciding vote in bringing in Cal, Stanford, and SC. Literally, you voted this in, and now there you go, right? So that's part of it. And we're having this conversation in the same breath as we look at the college football playoff changing yet again how the seeding is happening. If people can't keep up with what's going on, and you overlay this too with all the conversation about NCAA tournament expansion, just at some point, the wheel has to stop spinning so we can hold on to something. Andy, did you watch Lost?
Yes, I did.
Man, remember there's the episode where Desmond needs a constant because he keeps spinning, and it's like we have to have something.
The best episode of TV, period.
Yes, or thinking about Inception, right, where you have your totem so that you can anchor yourself to. It's like that thing. We need things to hold on to, and if the carousel doesn't stop spinning, people are going to get off and never want to ride again. Oh. All right, Andy, let's not get any more hot and bothered than we already are here. It's a great way to wrap up a fun week as we get now into even more of an off season with all the kind of NBA draft deadline decisions done and gone. So now we kind of enter a new phase of the off season. To that point, Monday show, Andy and I are going to do our updated way too early top 25s. Now that we have a better, this is probably the biggest next moment in rosters being a little bit more finalized. And so a great point to update that. So we'll do that on Monday show. Hope you all have a great weekend. If you've not subscribed to Locked On College Basketball on YouTube and audio, make sure you do that now so you don't miss a second of the show. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, we'd love to see you in there. That link is in the show notes and it's free to join. It's a great community. We'd love to have you. As always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Pope. Shouts to our guy, Mick Bruins. And until Monday, when Andy's voice hopefully feels a wildly bit different and better. We'll talk to you then. Peace.